Hello, I'm Chris Bowie-Hill and welcome to Vision, our regular catch-up with guests to discuss their views and vision of the world, be it property, future communities, technology or environment. Let's see where the conversation takes us. Today's guest is Shannon Conway, Residential Director at Glenbrook. Shannon is passionate about creating affordable communities. With almost 20 years of experience in residential property, she joined Glenbrook in 2020. Not only has Shannon acted as the chair of Women in Property Northwest, but she also co-hosts Glenbrook's property podcast. Welcome, Shannon. Thanks for speaking with us.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be interviewed for a podcast rather than being the interviewer, so it's quite a strange experience. For those who don't know, Glenbrook is a investor and a developer. I work on the development side of things, and we specialise in mainly build-to-rent apartment blocks, but we also deliver high-density schemes for housing associations as well. So to date, we've delivered 5, which is around about 1,200 apartments, and then we have another 6 in legals or going through planning, which will be another 2,500.
Exciting times for you and Glenbrook. And I've got to pick up just on the setting you're in. What's all this about? Why don't you tell us a bit more about the bit that you do in the spare time, I guess?
So at Glenbrook, we started a podcast around about 2 years ago. We always seem to be trailblazers, whether it's on build to rent or work with RPs or podcasts. I think it's by accident rather than design. But we started doing podcasts a couple of years ago. We're now in the top 3 for property podcasts in the UK. They're all very authentic, I think is the best word for that. And when I say that, you know, it's very much we have the conversations. There's a tiny bit of editing goes on, and it goes straight on the internet. So we really get to sort of grips with the subject matter. But we've decided to step up our game and convert a small part of our office into a podcast room. So it's all very soundproofed. We're halfway through. So hence we haven't quite got the lighting right, so it looks a bit like the Spanish Inquisition. And I'm holding the microphone because we have the furniture all on order, so it's going to come soon. But yeah, this is the first outing of our podcast room today.
Well, it's looking the real deal, and by the time it's pulled together, I'm sure there'll be no stopping you. You know, whoever's in number 1, perhaps the States Gazette, you'll be treading on their toes in no time, I'm sure. In terms of aspirations for the developments that you work on and that you're involved in, of course, all developments, they need to be commercially viable. Putting those bits aside, in terms of the value add, what's the Shannon Conway value add? What's your kind of bit that you bring to it that you would like to try and drive into each of these developments if you get your own way and there's a bit of extra wriggle room there? Well,
first and foremost, and this isn't a Shannon Conway ad, this is a Glenbrook one, is sustainability is absolutely key to us. This has been at the forefront for us for the last few years, but now the market is catching up. So the funds now are starting to drill down a little bit more about what we're trying to do. But luckily we've got the head start because we've been doing it for a few years. Key for us is just making sure that we improve on every single scheme. So it's not looking at Part L. And the upcoming changes to Part L, it's having a look at the embodied and operational carbon. So last year yourselves, so Hydrock came in and had a look at our most recent BTR scheme, which is Vox. It's 280 homes, apartment block, right next to a tram stop in Manchester. And we decided that will be our benchmark, so we understand exactly how that building performs. So we you guys looked at operational carbon and embodied carbon, and we're really happy to find out it hit the LETI guidance, LETI 2020 guidance. But that then gives us a benchmark, and it just helps us understand more about the design choices and the construction choices that were made, material choices, and then how we can influence that on each development. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to almost monetize a green premium to see if it does increase the rent. And if we can do that, then we can plug it into the appraisal, and then it's just an additional GDV. It's additional monies on your GDV. That means you can put a little bit more in terms of, green design and specification into the appraisal.
you're talking about how you try and monetize that green angle. How do you find working with agents and the likes in terms of trying to help work out what that valuation is? Because again, my experience has been that quite often a lot of the agents are working on historical data, but what this is about is obviously about trying to predict the future. Because when, as we know, when you purchase that piece of land and you're doing your development appraisal, what are you, 4 years away, 5 years away potentially from letting that first apartment? And the world's moving so quickly now. How do you deal with that bit?
So at the moment we don't put any green premium in at all, and it's very difficult to narrow down what somebody's paying for. So if it's a balcony, for example, you could probably get, I don't know, 100, let's just say £100 extra a month, because you can compare the apartment with the balcony in the same development to the one without the balcony. So it's a lot easier. You can see what someone will pay for a parking space depending on what the demand is in the development. But when you have a look at the premium someone will pay for living in a green building, it's far more difficult. So at the moment we have anecdotal evidence. So Vox, for example, just going back to that, the last scheme that we did, the people moving in don't know anything about Letty. So that's not something that the managing agents down there can talk about. But what they can talk about is it was designed with sustainability and well-being as its main core. So there are, 50% of the apartments have balconies. It's two separate buildings. One has PV cells across the whole roof, and you can see that roof from the other roof, which has got a running track and outdoor gardens, and bees were up there. I couldn't believe it. As soon as the flowers came out, the bees came. I thought, where have these bees come from? It's quite a sort of industrial area. It was amazing. They have sort of like yoga studios there, and lots of green initiatives. The car club is there. There's not a huge amount of parking. There's lots of cycle spaces, and they try and encourage the tenants as much as possible to look into sort of energy saving within their apartments. We're signed up with a green energy provider. And the anecdotal evidence is that people like that thought has gone into the development. So sort of thinking, they feel like they're in a greener development, and if it's between A and B, they'll go with this particular one. So it's all very anecdotal. But I do think in the last 5 years that things have changed considerably when it comes to sustainability. And I know that there's some more guidance coming out from the RICS with regards to valuation, which hopefully will capture a lot more of that value.
Let's talk technology for a second. If you could have any piece of magic technology or sensor that told you something about your developments, about your buildings, about whatever it is you do, what would the magic technology be, do you think?
It's if you could read people's minds and document it when they went around your development. So often when you're showing someone round, people will be very polite. Whereas if you had some sort of mind-reading equipment that recorded it and someone said, oh, that wardrobe's a bit small, that would be fantastic. We try and complete the circle, the design and experience circle by talking to we've got one this Thursday actually, the guys on the management teams who are in all our developments. We're getting them together to just tell us exactly what works and what doesn't work in our developments, and we're bringing the architect along, and it's a one-way conversation. We just want them to say everything, what works, what doesn't work, what they would do differently, and we won't be challenging them, we won't be telling them why it was done that way, the development was designed that way, or why it wasn't commercially viable to do what they're suggesting. It's just all about listening to them and hearing, what it's like to put your bins out, what it's like for them having to, talk to all the tenants. Is there any sort of antisocial behaviour? Do the doors work? Is the cycle storage? What works in the apartment? Is there an apartment type in there that everybody hates that you just can't let? What's the sound quality? The sound issues between apartments, heating, cooling. Just tell us everything so that we can use that feedback for the next development. But I know we won't get completely honest feedback, because there'll still be that need to be polite and respectful. So I think that would be great, some sort of truth serum, but knowing what every single person that goes in that development. So in those developments, we have people who just have a look round, obviously, to see if they want to live there. But then we also, you know, we might take other consultants who just want to have a look at the development as well. So it would be really good when they leave the front door to give them some truth serum, and then all their thoughts go into some sort of database that magically sorts everything and hashtags and tags every word, so you can search it quite easily and analyse the data. That's what I'd like.
So it's that critical feedback piece, isn't it? You know, because it's great. You know, I always think that people who want that critical feedback are obviously driven by or motivated by improvement, and obviously there's that runs strong through you and Glenbrook. So listen, anyone who's out there working with Shannon, all she's after is some critical feedback. Be honest.
We're thick-skinned.
What are the trends in build to rent, and where do you think this is going over the sort of the next 10, 15, 20 years? That bit that we said, you know, we can't put the green premium on. We almost know it's going to be there, but no one can necessarily prove it, so you can't necessarily work to it. What are those trends would you love to be putting some extra money into now?
I think just generally build to rent is going to be the tenure of choice in the rental sector. I think we're already seeing that. We're seeing a flight from the traditional BTL into BTR. It's funny, when most tenants go into a BTR scheme, and we can see this in Manchester has really led the way in this. A few years ago, I was fighting with people who said it was all like Manchester's oversupply in Manchester. I'd say absolutely not. This is the beginning of a revolution. It's just the beginning. It's not oversupply. And what you find is when somebody goes into a BTR scheme and then leaves for whatever reason and goes into the traditional rental sector again, they'll be back. They'll be back very quickly, because once you get used to a level of service, you can't go back. It's frustrating when you're trying to, you know, get something repaired, and it can be no fault of a landlord or an agent, but you've got to phone the agent's got to phone the landlord's got to get the funds and, you know, say yes to the agent, and then the estate agent has to go and find a tradesman, and it's just a very long-winded process. So it's nobody's fault. No one's a bad guy. It's just the system. So when people think about BTR as being amenity, it's amenity driven and gyms and all the rest of it, rooftop, this, that, the other. It's not about that at all. It's about service, and it's about a good level of customer service. So I think we're just going to see more and more BTR being the tenure of choice, and you will have choice across the price bands, and also get into more suburban locations, rural locations even. I think that's where we're going to see BTR. It's just going to become the norm.
So Shannon, as per the name of this series, the Vision Series, what I'd love to hear now is your vision for the future, looking 10, 15, 20 years ahead. How do you think the industry is going to play out? And if you can convince me, perhaps I'll put a tenner on it. So what do you think, Shannon?
I think the first thing I'd say is that any vision of the future, I'm going to make the assumption that the government has stepped up and sorted the cladding crisis out. I'm going to make that assumption, because unless they do, I think there could be some catastrophic effects on the whole housing market. So I'm going to make the assumption that the government has done that. So am I allowed to do that? I feel like I'm at the end of Desert Island Discs here, and I'm asking about all the rules. So I'm allowed to do that. Okay, so I'll make that assumption first. And then I suppose from my perspective, it's build to rent. So I would say that build to rent is firmly embodied as just a way of renting, is an expectation of that service. If you go into the rental sector in one way or another, you will have an expectation of service that's provided. And I think with that, schemes will get bigger. They'll have more varied product. Because they get bigger, there'll be more opportunity to shape the place that they're in. I think then we will get much better product and much better tenant experience. I also think with that security of tenure and that quality, you will have a range of ages, which sort of opens up developments in city centres to all ages. So, I mean, this is already happening. Our schemes at the moment, you'll see age range between 8 and 69 in our most recent scheme. And that's because it's a great level of service, more than anything. So I think we'll start seeing a wider demographic of people in areas that you wouldn't normally have seen them in before. And I do think that sustainability will be key, and being able to live a sustainable lifestyle. So being able to live without a car necessarily, being close to public transport, I think these factors will all play into it. So yeah, that's my vision of the future. So something green, community focused, different ages living together, and really good service in the rental sector, which has been lacking for a while.
Yeah, so demographically diverse, accessible, inclusive, service-focused, experiential. Yeah, I would definitely put a tenner on that. I think that's a fantastic vision.
Would you live there? Who wouldn't live there?
Who wouldn't live there? Shannon, I'd like to say a massive thank you to you for your time, for your ideas, for your engaged conversation. It's been fascinating, and hopefully we shall catch up soon.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me.